to cast their ballots in Arizona and other crucial presidential battlegrounds across the U.S. Another batch of exit poll data is coming in right now. For that, let's go to David Chalian. David, what are some of the top issues for voters in this election?
Yeah, Anderson, again, these are preliminary numbers. They'll change as we do more interviews, but we're looking broadly, nationally, at the whole electorate. And take a look at this. Democracy ranks as the most important issue for 35% of voters. That's the top slot for voters today. The economy is pretty close. It comes in second there, 31% of voters saying that's their most important issue. Then a little bit lower, abortion at only 14% saying it's the most important issue, and immigration below that at 11%, foreign policy way down in single digits. I also want to show this by each candidate's supporters. It sort of explains a bit of their coalition. Among Harris voters in these preliminary exit polls, 56% of Harris voters say democracy is the #1 issue. So it's the Harris coalition that's driving democracy to the top of the pack in the issue set. 21% say abortion among Harris voters, then the economy, foreign policy, and immigration. You imagine it's quite different if you look at the Trump voters. So among those supporting President Trump, a majority, 51%, slim majority, say the economy is their top issue, followed by 20% of Trump supporters who say immigration is their top issue, then democracy, then abortion, and then foreign policy.
All right, David, I want to talk over the numbers. We're going to come back to you shortly. Alyssa, what do you think?
This is fascinating. I think democracy ranking so high speaks to something that may be happening this cycle that I'm not sure that the polls have adequately captured. Kamala Harris made the decision, the strategic decision, to build a coalition. She didn't double down on turning out the base and just turning out the Democratic coalition. You've got AOC to the Cheneys and now the leader of the uncommitted movement backing Kamala Harris. And I think it speaks to this concern that even if you like the Trump era, maybe your taxes were a little lower, you felt good about the economy, concerns about the direction of the country when it comes to American democracy. This is a motivating issue. I think it plays in the suburbs. I think we've undercounted how much it may actually impact this election. So that stands out to me. And I do want to just agree with something Dan and Bash said. This answer of America's best days are in the future. I don't see that as a referendum on Kamala Harris. There's one candidate who in her closing message has talked about the future and a brighter future. It's her. Donald Trump has largely looked backward, relitigated past issues and grievances.
Yeah, I think this whole, I think what we've seen so far is a microcosm of the entire campaign.
Yeah.
The idea that 72% of the people were dissatisfied or angry in the last set, and that Biden has 41% approval rating. Chris Wallace was right. No incumbent party in history has won an election with those kind of numbers. But I do think that she has been pretty skillful at sort of charting her own course, hitting issues like democracy, abortion, and enough on the economy that she's building a hopeful coalition. And what these don't reflect is people's view of Donald Trump as a person and the character of his leadership, which is where the hopeful nature of her candidacy is playing against his.
It's a good spin. Listen, 72% of Americans think we're on the wrong track. That's devastating, devastating for this campaign. Devastating. Trump's approval rating going into this election is the highest it's been. Retrospectively, Americans think more favor of him today than they ever did in the entire presidency.
Then why is the race tied, Dave?
Dave, I don't
explain why the race is tied.
I can't explain it, but I'm saying
also,
these numbers, the economy.
Race is tied.
No, you're talking about the economy, right? People, it's nice to worry about the democracy, but if you can't pay for your food,
and I totally agree.
I agree with that. And that's why she spent so much time talking about it.
She closed out talking about the economy, not even saying his name.
Listen,
he was talking about Van Jones, among other things.
Listen, I'm wrapping myself in this poll. Look at this. I'm just going to hold on to this tightly right now because this is great news.
We'll see what you're wrapping yourself with.
This is great news for the Trump campaign.
Van, let's hear from you.
Hi.
That's only we have.
This is what happens when they give us caffeine.
You guys are coming in hot.
But listen, I do see it differently than you do. People are angry and people are dissatisfied in large part because Donald Trump has created an environment that is so toxic for people. You have people who are literally afraid of whatever happens this election. There are people who are afraid that if he wins, he's going to do bad stuff to them, and they're afraid if he loses, his supporters might hurt them. That is a part of this overall. Yeah. So people's dissatisfaction with the status quo includes dissatisfaction and anger.
I think, listen, Van, you said this before. You said this before. So I'm going to steal your own line.
Please do.
People are dissatisfied. That right check, wrong check number is so bad because when the check engine light comes on in their car, they get pissed off because they can't pay for it.
Sure.
That's why they're
Yeah,
dissatisfied.
but you know what?
That's why they're angry.
Can I just make
believe
a point about this? I think the brilliance of the way Harris finished this campaign is she attached Trump's character issues, the fact that he's absorbed with himself, made some progress doing it.
Let's go back to David Chalian. It's got another readout from the exit polls. What candidate quality is resonating most with voters right now?
Yeah, Anderson, one of the things we've been tracking throughout this campaign is sort of if voters are voting for their candidate of choice or more coming out to vote against their opponent. So among Harris voters in these preliminary exit poll results, and this again is nationwide, 67% of Harris voters say they're coming out to vote in this election for Harris. Only 29% of Harris voters say that they're out there casting their ballot to oppose Trump. Now, those numbers are even bigger in this direction for Donald Trump supporters. Among his supporters, 80% of them say they're out there casting their ballot for Donald Trump. 17% say they're showing up to cast a ballot against Harris. We also asked about certain qualities that each coalition was looking for. So among Harris voters, 35% of them say they were looking for a candidate that has good judgment. That was the quality that mattered most to them. 28% of Harris supporters say they were looking for somebody who cares about people like me. 21% say has ability to lead. And only 13% of Harris supporters said they were looking for someone to bring about needed change. It's a complete reversal when you look at the Trump coalition here. 41% of Trump supporters said the most important quality was looking for somebody who had the ability to lead. Right up there, almost tied, 39%, looking for a candidate who can bring needed change. And then everything else was in single digits. Only 9% of Trump supporters said they were looking for someone who cares about people like me, and only 7% of Trump supporters were looking for a presidential candidate who has good judgment, Anderson.
Oh, fascinating. That's fascinating.
Well, listen, that explains a lot. It's like literally, like if you don't care, if somebody cares about you or has good judgment, Donald Trump is your candidate. They know he doesn't care about them. They know he has terrible judgment.
They want someone who's going to fight for him.
But somebody who doesn't care about them, only cares about himself. I do think this is helpful because it literally is upside down world. And I think it's important to point out that Kamala Harris has crossed the bridge of convincing people that she cares about people like them, that she has good judgment. That is an important value that I think is going to show up in a big way today.
I'm also surprised immigration has gone down in its significance of top issues, which was 1 and 2 for most of this race. And I have to wonder if that's because Donald Trump led on it for so long, but I think Kamala Harris was able to negate some of that steam by saying she would have signed the border bill that he had passed. I think that may have resonated with voters, that they realize there's 2 candidates who care about this issue. They simply have different approaches.
I'm not sure if I were any candidate that I'd feel good about the fact that my own voters were motivated by good judgment, and I got 7% of the people who said you had good judgment. She's 35%. This battery goes back to the thing I was talking about. I mean, I think people think Donald Trump's strong. They say his supporters say he has the ability to lead. But the question is, who is he leading for? Is he leading for me? His supporters may believe that, but this issue of caring about people like you, this issue of has good judgment. I mean, these are character issues about the character of your leadership. And I think people are making a judgment as to where are my interests best served, with the strong guy who knows how to lead or with a person who I think hears me, is going to be thinking about me. And that's really
These
the
exit
dynamic
polls
of this
are a
race.
little bit like a Rorschach
Yeah, but
test.
again,
I mean, you can
I'll
kind
go
of
back.
see
Listen,
in them whatever you want.
I'll just go back to Van's point because I love this point, right? All that's great, but if your check engine light comes on, you don't care about any of it.
I agree with you.
But
You don't care about any of it.
I think built into what you're saying, again, it is a Rorschach test because I would have been with you. I think Donald Trump was way ahead on the economy, but he melted down in this final stretch in the closing message. And Kamala Harris is talking about home health care for people who have senior parents. She's talking about the opportunity economy. She's tried to turn that message as somebody who her parents didn't own a home until she was in high school. Yeah. She related on the issues of understanding the economic struggle. And he was talking about the things I'm not even going to repeat they used as a closing message. I think that's where it may have shifted.
I do think that she's been able to kind of walk him down in the economy by talking about stuff like, if you have a kid, you're going to get $6,000 for a newborn. Like walk them down, and close that gap.
We're going to break down more exit poll information straight ahead. Also, we're getting closer to the first results of the night in the presidential race. First votes that have been counted. There's a lot coming up on election night in America. Stay tuned.
There is a lot riding on voters who are turning out of polling places across the country right now. We're getting an early read on what's driving their choices in this historic race for the White House. David Chalian is back with new exit poll data and information. David, how is the issue of the economy playing with voters in this election?
Yeah, Jake, we're doing a deep dive into the economy. It's the second ranked issue, as you saw earlier. Look here, 31% of voters nationwide in these preliminary exit poll results say that the economy was the most important issue driving their vote, second only to democracy. So what is the condition of the nation's economy, we ask people? Well, only 5% of voters say it's excellent and 28% say it's good. The vast majority say it's not so good, 35%, or poor, 32%. So that's 67%, two-thirds of voters in this election nationwide say not so good or poor. And what about inflation? Has it caused your family severe hardship, moderate hardship? Look at this, 53%, a majority of Americans voting in this election say that inflation in the last year has caused their family moderate hardship. Another 21% say severe hardship, so some kind of hardship for 74%, three-quarters of the electorate. Only a quarter, 24%, say inflation didn't cause them any hardship at all. And what about your family's financial situation? Better or worse than it was 4 years ago? We hear Donald Trump ask that question all the time at his rallies. Well, the plurality here, 45% of Americans nationwide voting in this election, say their family's financial situation is worse than 4 years ago. 30% say it's about the same. Only a quarter, 24%, say it's better than 4 years ago, Jake.
All right, David Chalian, thanks so much. And Aaron Burnett is now getting an update from the Western battlegrounds. Aaron?
All right, Jake. And, looking at these exit polls, you can make an argument either way. And in hindsight, we will look back. We will be able to parse all this together and see what it really is saying here. But let's go to some of these battlegrounds. Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia. Let's start, though, with you, Sarah Seidner, in Wisconsin. Cedarburg, outside Milwaukee. You hear all these exit polls coming in, but you're actually speaking to voters there at the polls. Does this fit with what you're seeing, and what are you seeing right now?
Look, we've been seeing a steady stream of people coming through here, and they're expecting this to be potentially one of the highest percentages of voters turnout that they have seen ever, with 95 potentially % of registered voters showing up here at this poll. But I do want to give you some new information that we have just gotten in the city of Milwaukee, which is about 20 miles from where we are. We are in the suburbs here. They are now saying, according to election officials there, that they're going to have to rerun about 30,000 absentee ballots through tabulating machines for an abundance of caution, because what they learned is that the doors of one of its tabulating machines were open. It hadn't been closed properly, and they want to make absolutely sure that the machine counted everything properly. So they are rerunning 30,000 ballots. Why that is important is it will mean that there will take a longer time to count those absentee ballots. And if you will remember, back in 2020, it was the absentee ballots and waiting for those to be counted, which we heard Donald Trump and the Republicans jump on, saying there's some sort of malfeasance. Officials are saying this is not the case. There was an issue with one of the machines not being closed properly, and they want to make, out of abundance of caution, sure that each and every vote is properly counted. So we may have to wait a bit longer to find out what the tally of those absentee votes were in Milwaukee, the most populous city in Wisconsin.
All right, and obviously abundance of caution is important. Those wanting the quick results, sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you want, but 30,000, they're going to rerun those. Every single one of those counts when it comes to getting this final number. Let's go to Michigan, Macomb Township, right outside of Detroit. Jim Sciutto is there, and Jim, we've heard about record turnout in Michigan as well. Secretary of State talking about that. What are you seeing at the polling site where you are?
Yeah, they said they were on track for record turnout in the whole state of Michigan, and certainly where we are in Macomb Township and Macomb County, just outside of Detroit, they're seeing this. We're right in the middle of the lines here. They've been wrapping around the building here, coming down, casting their votes, and then up here they enter them into the machines. Keep in mind, this is day 10 of voting here. There were 9 days of early voting. That's new, voted in via constitutional amendment in 2022. So this is the first presidential cycle with that early voting. And I talked to the township clerk here. She said she's seen lines as long as 60, 90 minutes every one of those 9 early voting days. Maximum enthusiasm. She says voters are telling her they really want their vote to count this year. They see their vote as counting. She's seen a big number of first-time voters as well. And that is not just happening here in Macomb Township and Macomb County. It's happening across the state. Even before today, more than, well, close to 3.5 million people had already voted, close to half the active registered voters in the state. And just one measure of that, you know, it's really hot today. It's these I voted stickers, and they were part of a contest around the state. Kids in the state, high school students, adults. One of the favorites is "Ope, I voted." If you know the Midwest, a little bit of a Midwestern expression there as well. That's one sign of the enthusiasm in the state of Michigan.
Yeah, incredible enthusiasm everywhere, and then we'll see how it turns out. Let's go to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Kylie Atwood has been there. And Kylie, earlier when I was speaking to you, you were showing us how it works where you are. What are you hearing now from voters? It looks a little quiet behind you. Do you think you've sort of seen it, or more people coming in here at the end?
Aaron, it has been a little bit quiet, but there's been a consistent flow of folks coming in to vote here on the western side of Michigan in Grand Rapids. We have one voter with us this evening who actually voted for Trump. Josh, can you tell us a little bit about why you cast your ballot for Trump tonight?
I guess it'd have to do with I'm more of like a blue collar worker, and I knew that one of the things he said he was going to do was cut taxes for overtime. So, and that's how I make a lot of my money. So that was like probably the main driving force, I won't lie.
So for you, it's really a financial decision more than anything else?
Right, yeah, I'd probably say that, especially with the way the economy's been, so.
Did you vote for Trump in the past in 2016 and 2020?
I didn't.
You didn't? So did you vote at all in 2016 and 2020?
No, I didn't, actually.
Oh, interesting. So this is the first presidential election that you've cast a ballot for in a few cycles now.
Yeah, I think Obama was the last person I voted for, I won't lie.
All right, back to you guys. This is a type of voter that the Trump campaign is going to need to see out here in Oakland if win this county.
Yeah, absolutely, Kylie. And there you go. When they've been talking about are there those shadow Trump voters or shadow Harris voters, there you go. A Trump voter who didn't vote in the election in 2020 or 2016. John King, he was saying Barack Obama was the last person that he voted for. I mean, there you go. That's what they're trying to find.
You're trying to find voters who are open and available. There are 25 counties, we'll watch them later tonight, 25 counties in America that voted twice for Barack Obama, then for Donald Trump, and then for Joe Biden. Those are voters who swing with the moment, right? We'll track those counties later. But let's go back to where we just heard those voters. We were just in Michigan, right? This is the 2020 map, right? Let me just show you. 2024 map, it's going to fill in just a minute. We'll start getting votes top of the hour. We'll go on. But let's just use the 2020 map as an example and look at the state of Michigan. So you just heard a voter out in the Grand Rapids area. That's Kent County. This used to be Republican territory, and it's become more Democratic. However, the margins here matter. You see that, 52 to 46, if you round the former president up there. So a 6-point race in Grand Rapids in 2020 when Joe Biden carried Michigan. All right, you go back to 2016, and you look at the margins here, and it's a Trump on top of Hillary Clinton in this area right here. So the margins within some of these battlegrounds matter. If Trump can turn Kent County red, Trump is well poised to win the state of Michigan. That's Michigan 2016. Let's come back to 2020, and let's bring up here where Jim Sciutto was. You see Detroit. Detroit is blue right here, but look just north of Detroit. That's Oakland County. Used to be a Republican suburb, more educated, more affluent. This is Macomb County. This used to be a Democratic suburb, blue collar, auto workers, people in the mechanized industries here. You see, this is Trump country, but the margins matter. Joe Biden gets 45% in 2020. When Joe Biden carries Michigan, go back to 2016, Hillary Clinton's getting only 42% of the vote. So sometimes you're looking at a county and it's red or blue. That's not enough. We need to look at the margins. This is all about turnout. And for Kamala Harris in Macomb County, let's come back to 2020 as an example. It's also about whether her union allies succeed or fail in getting some of their workers to set aside guns issues or cultural issues or social issues or affinity for Donald Trump. You just heard the workers saying no tax on overtime pay. Can labor unions convince their workers actually organizing and other labor issues are more important? So you look for the margins in a place like this. And if Vice President Harris is losing votes there, she wants to track Biden, but let's assume she's a little below Biden in Macomb County. Well, then you're doing the math. She has to make it up in more affluent Oakland County. This is her coalition is very complicated. If she's going to lose a little bit, because of the dynamics, the question is where can she make it up? And so Michigan is one of the fantastic opportunities to do that as we start to come into votes. And remember, the 3 blue wall states have voted together since 1992. We'll find out tonight if that pattern continues or if it is broken.
All right, thanks, John. We're just minutes away from the very first votes of the 2024 election coming through in areas with the earliest poll closings, and we're getting closer to the end of voting in battleground Georgia, the first pivotal battleground state on our radar tonight. After months of anticipation, the results are finally coming soon in this historic presidential race. We'll be right back. And you're looking right now, live images from Mesa, Arizona. Americans taking advantage of their right to vote with the White House and the balance of power in Congress on the line. The first results of the presidential race, the first actual votes are coming up very soon. But right now to Aaron Burnett with yet another battleground report. Aaron.
All right, Jake, and of course it's all about the battlegrounds as we await these results. We still see people in state after state waiting to vote, waiting for their voice to be heard. Let's go to Georgia. Victor Blackwell, where you are right now. What are you seeing as we're getting into these final hours here of people being able to vote in a state where you are that we anticipate could have record turnout?
Aaron, let me start with some breaking news. I'm in Lawrenceville. That's in Gwinnett County, which is one of the Atlanta metro area counties that's increasingly becoming more Democratic or a pickup for the Democrats. What we've learned in just the last few moments is that after one of those bomb threats that was made against a polling location here in Gwinnett County around 12:45 today, a Superior Court judge has now extended voting at two precincts. Precinct 112 and Precinct 52. Now, they were both in the same facility. That's the Mountain Park Activity Center in Stone Mountain. It was evacuated for about an hour, so everything stopped down there for about 58 minutes. So voting will continue until 7:58 p.m. tonight. That just coming in, a ruling from a Superior Court judge here. Let me show you. This is the Grace New Hope Church. We are just before another rush here that's expected. I spoke with Margie, who's the poll manager here, and says that as we get closer to 7 p.m., this polling location will close at 7, that she's expecting another rush. This morning, she says she's never seen anything like it. People who showed up, she said women, people of color, Asian Americans as well. She said a lot of excitement from young people. Aaron, back to you.
A lot of excitement from young people. We're hearing that in Atlanta. Of course, we're hearing that out west. We heard it from the Secretary of State in Nevada. We'll see what it means. Let's go to Kate Baldwin. She's at a polling place outside Philadelphia. And Kate, I know there was a response there as you're talking to officials to some social media posts from Trump.
Absolutely. Look, disinformation, misinformation, it's been running rampant, and it's been something that officials in Pennsylvania have been trying to fight against ahead of Election Day, to reassure people that this election here will be safe and secure just as it was in 2020. They're now having to combat that from the very top. Donald Trump sending out about 4:30 a Truth Social post saying that he's heard a lot of talk about massive cheating in Philadelphia, saying law enforcement was on the way. We just got a statement from the Philadelphia City Commissioners, the people in charge of running the election in Philadelphia and overseeing it, saying this. Seth Bluestein saying this. There is absolutely no truth to this allegation. It is yet another example of disinformation. Voting in Philadelphia has been safe and secure. He goes on to say, we have been in regular contact with the RNC. We have been responsive to every report of irregularities at the polls to ensure Philadelphians can vote safely and securely. Taking it a step further, my colleague Holmes Librand spoke with the Philadelphia Police Department. They also said, Aaron, they are not aware of what Donald Trump is referring to, but that is the reality in Philadelphia of what they continue the counting. They're keeping their heads down and continuing to get the work done, but they're now having to combat this on Election Day from Donald Trump.
All right, Kate. Thank you very much. And our voting desk is keeping tabs on all the presidential battlegrounds. Anywhere that there's been a delay or someone has called for any kind of a concern on anything, we now have some new reporting out of Philadelphia. Pam Brown, you're at the voting desk where there's been some new details on what's happening there.
Yeah, that's right. I've been speaking to officials across the country, but in Pennsylvania, the crown jewel battleground Commonwealth, I should say, I just got off the phone with an official there in Philadelphia, and this is what the official told me. Overall, they have 182,000 early ballots in Philly counted so far, and 75 to 100,000 of those will be released at 8:01 p.m. tonight after the polls close. So we should note that overall number could rise in Philly because voters have until 8 p.m. to drop off their early ballots. Now, let's kick it over here to Arizona. Arizona, actually, I just got off from the phone with a source in Maricopa, the largest county there. That source tells me it is taking longer than expected to process those early ballots. Here's why, Aaron. This year, they have double the amount of paper, front and back. 79 measures and contests that they have to process with the two pieces of paper, and they also have to check the signatures on the envelope. So this first release of 1.1 to 1.2 million ballots at about 10 p.m. Eastern tonight, that will come through. Those will only account for early votes through last Tuesday, October 29th. That's less than the initial estimate that the first drop would be comprised of ballots through at least Friday. That's what they had hoped for. Now, the first drop is expected to be about 55% of the total vote turnout for Maricopa. The next results reported overnight will include today's Election Day votes. In addition to that, officials will need to process the ballots dropped off across the county today. And then Nevada is another state that we're keeping a close eye on. They have to wait for every voter in line by the time polls close at 10 p.m. Eastern to vote, and for every poll location in the state to close before results are released, Aaron.
So it's going to take longer than maybe many people had hoped. Okay, so there's that. When you look at Arizona, where might we get results more quickly tonight, Pam?
Well, Georgia is showing promising signs. I've been speaking to an election official there on the ground. Most polls will close at 7 p.m. Eastern, with the exception of 2 polling places in Cobb County and a few others requesting an extension. Now, by law, the state has to report all the mail-in ballots received by Monday by an hour after polls close. But officials say that I've been speaking to, they expect around 75% of Georgia's overall vote to be released at around 8 o'clock. And then an official I've been speaking to says the majority of precincts will still report their first batch of results after polls close. Now, in Michigan, the Secretary of State, I just spoke to the Secretary of State, just got off the phone with her, and she tells me they're on track to match and possibly surpass their turnout record from 2020. The Secretary of State also tells me that at 9 p.m. Eastern, all the early in-person votes and the vast majority of today's Election Day votes should be in, and then they'll be made publicly throughout the night. She also notes, and this could be important, Aaron, depending on how close this race is, that 7,000 overseas ballots have not been returned yet. So again, another factor in all of this. Back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Secretary of State there earlier, Secretary Benson, saying if it comes down to a margin of 7,000, we could be waiting. If it's not that tight, we may find this out much more quickly. So we will see. All right, Pam, thank you very much on the voting desk. Let's go to Sarah Murray. She is in Atlanta with new information on the voting there. What have you just learned, Sarah?
Well, Aaron, we learned that there are 5 locations here in Fulton County that will be staying open later because they had to be briefly evacuated today because of these non-credible bomb threats. Obviously, this is an issue that folks in Georgia, as well as a couple other states, have been grappling with today. Now, we just learned from county officials here in Fulton County the polls will be open anywhere from 10 minutes to 45 minutes past this 7 p.m. deadline when they were expected to close. Again, this is designed to give voters an opportunity to vote to make up for the period that these locations were closed today. Now, as Pam Brown was just pointing out, Georgia does have a rule that says an hour after your polls close, you need to report early absentee advanced voting. And in speaking to officials, they still believe we are going to see very timely results in Georgia, even though we have these 5 locations in Fulton County that are going to be staying open later, as well as a handful of other locations across the state. Still a lot of optimism from officials here that we are going to see some speedy results tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Republican Secretary of State there has been so confident in that. We hope that's the case. All right, Sarah Murray, thank you very much with that latest reporting from Atlanta. Let's go over to John King. I'm peeking behind you at the wall. I see Pennsylvania is up.
So as you were translating what that means, I want to try to add to that as well as we go through it. Number one, let's start out west, and I'm going to walk over this way for a minute. If this race comes down to Arizona and Nevada, which is distinctly possible given how close it was, you get the impression from what we just heard, the counts there could take a little bit longer. If it comes down 11 and 6 in terms of the electoral votes, if it comes down to out west. However, it's also quite possible when we get these, which some will be late tonight, some could be tomorrow or beyond, we'll get more. So let's wander back over here and go through what we just heard. And I'll have Pennsylvania up because you just heard from Kate Baldwin. So let's start with Kate Baldwin. She's here in Bucks County. This is one of the key collar counties right around Philadelphia. Democrats need to run it up big in Philadelphia and then do well in the suburbs around it. Bucks County, blue collar, cops, firefighters, close to Philadelphia, which is just here to the south. This has been the most competitive of the collar counties. The more affluent, more educated, Montgomery and Delaware have become overwhelmingly Democratic. Look how close Bucks County was in 2020, 52 to 47. Go back to 2016, it's even closer, 48 to 48, or 49 if you round up Secretary Clinton to 48 there. So that's a very important point when Kate is saying, you know, there could be keeping precincts open a little bit longer to deal with that. That's what happens on election night, number one. Number two, if you're still voting and you see things on social media, check with your state officials or your county officials. Be careful about what you believe on social media, especially if it's coming from somebody who has a stake in the outcome of the election. So that's Pennsylvania there. I just want to go quickly down to Georgia where Victor Blackwell was because he makes an important point. Both Sarah Murray here in Fulton County some bomb threats, so they're going to keep polls open. An absolutely essential area, 10% of the state population. You see how important it is to the Democratic coalition there. But then where Victor was out here in Gwinnett County. Again, as Victor noted, this was Republican territory 8, 10, 12 years ago. It is increasingly Democratic territory now, you see right there. So keeping the polling places open for a little bit longer could be incredibly important. And again, bomb threats, that's unusual. Keeping polling places open a little bit later because something happens, that's part of the process, Jake. Happens all the time, and we just need to be patient.
All right, thanks so much. And we're getting a new read on the issues that matter to voters. David Chalian back with more exit poll information. David, how concerned are people about this issue of protecting democracy?
Yeah, it's the #1 issue, according to the exit poll of voters across the country in this election. 35% of voters in this election, Jake, say it is the most important issue. So we went a little deeper. Is democracy in the U.S. secure or threatened? 73% of voters nationally in this election, according to these preliminary exit poll results, say U.S. democracy is threatened. Only 25% think it's secure. Are you confident that elections are being conducted fairly and accurately in the United States? Well, 2/3 of voters in this election, 68%, say they are confident. 31% of voters say they're not confident that elections are being conducted fairly and accurately today. We also wanted to look at that by coalition of support here. So among Harris voters in this election nationally, Drake, 88%, nearly 9 out of 10 Harris voters are confident that elections are being conducted fairly and accurately. Only 11% are not confident. As I'm sure you could imagine, after the last 4 years, Donald Trump supporters, it's a totally different story. It's a split decision. Only 47% of Trump voters in this election say they're confident that the election is conducted fairly and accurately. 52%, a slim majority of Trump voters, are not confident, Jake. We also asked, are you concerned about violence as a result of the election? And overall, 71% of voters across the country, according to these early exit polls, say yes, they are concerned about violence. 27%, Jake, say no, they're not.
All right, David Chalian, thanks so much. Anderson, over to you.
Yeah, Jake, thanks very much. Just looking at the new exit polls, anything surprise you on this?
Listen, I'm actually surprised by the number of Republicans in this exit poll that actually do trust the election. It's nearly half.
Given all the rhetoric from the former president.
Yeah, and as we speak, Donald Trump is espousing on his Truth Social that there's fraud in Philadelphia. It's been knocked down by local election officials. But this is happening in real time.
By the way, the top election official in Pennsylvania is Republican.
Is a Republican. But listen, I think it's not helpful to Donald Trump if democracy is actually as high on voters' minds. Now, people can interpret that different. I think that there are some on the right who are going to say, well, the threat to democracy is the other side. But I think by and large, that tends to capture the voters who are concerned about January 6th, stop the steal, and efforts to overturn the election.
I think this challenging, this assertion of fraud in Philly and some of the other things he's said lately is one of the reasons why people are concerned about violence and about what's going to happen after the election, because this has become more and more a mantra as the days have come toward the election.
Look, I think Governor Shapiro and the team in Pennsylvania have done a laudable job in doing things. They're transparent. We don't have butcher paper up on the windows like we had in the last election. People are being shown things. There's like cameras there. So I am confident that this will be a fair election, a free election, and that it's going to come out, the way it's supposed to come out. People are voting in record numbers, and I'm hopeful that our team wins.
Well, I mean, to me, it is interesting that democracy, which should be a shared value, has now become almost a partisan issue. When you looked at concern for democracy was not very high for a party, the Republican Party, that's supposed to be the party of liberty, the party of patriotism. Something's really happened. I think the Democratic Party, has picked up the banner of a deeper kind of patriotism and a deeper kind of commitment to democracy, and I think that shows in these numbers.
It's interesting, though, the people were critical early on of Kamala Harris for running on the defense of democracy idea. It seems, certainly just from these exit polls, that it
kind of redeems it. But I don't think she ran on those alone. It would have been a mistake to do so. I think the people who cared deeply about that were going to be with her, and so that is in the mix. But on your point about democracy, look, Donald Trump's project has been to raise doubts about all institutions.
Our coverage continues right now.
It is election night in America. These are live pictures from a polling place near Milwaukee, Wisconsin, one of the 7 battleground states expected to ultimately decide who becomes the 47th president of these United States. I'm Jake Tapper in the CNN Election Center. The very first presidential votes of 2024 are about to be posted. The American people deciding whether to elevate Vice President Kamala Harris to the top job or return former President Donald Trump to the White House. We're getting closer to the first major round of poll closings and our first chance to make projections. That will be about an hour from now. 60 of the 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency will be on the line at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's when all voting ends in Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia. Some polling places in the Eastern time zone in Indiana and Kentucky are actually closing right now, and we expect early results from those 2 states at any moment. Georgia is the first crucial battleground state on our radar this evening. The state was pivotal in the Democrats' 2020 presidential victory, and Georgia's 16 electoral votes could be decisive in this election as well. Our correspondents are tracking Election Day voting in all the top swing states and will be on the scene as the first vote counts are reported. Our correspondents are working their sources inside the Harris and Trump campaigns. Let's check in with Abby Phillip, who is at Harris headquarters at Howard University here in Washington, D.C. And Abby, what are you hearing from the campaign at this hour?
Well, Jake, these are the critical turnout hours for the Harris campaign, and I'm here with my colleague Jeff Zelady. He's got some new reporting about how the Harris campaign, Jeff, is trying to, in these final moments, reach the people that they need to reach who maybe haven't voted yet.
It's so extraordinary, Abby. Even as the vice president is at the Naval Observatory here, about 100 miles away in the campaign's war room in Wilmington, they are checking these turnout numbers and literally going door by door. A senior advisor told me just a short time ago, if you have not voted yet, you will get a knock on your door or someone will give you a phone call. Just a few moments ago, the campaign sent out a blast release trying to get volunteers to call people who have not voted. So that is how micro this is. But on a broader sense, the Harris campaign, as you've been reporting earlier, she is feeling optimistic, we're told, but cautious. And one question is, yes, they do believe turnout is high in cities like Madison and Milwaukee and Detroit, but the high turnout can obviously go both ways. So the question of the gender gap is front and center here. We're at Howard University, obviously, and her supporters will be coming in here shortly. And I'm told that she has also been working on a speech. We do not know if she will deliver it here tonight, of course. It could be one of 2 kinds, but we do know that she will be acting very quickly to whatever the Trump campaign does. So look, 1 hour before polls close in critical Georgia, this election is still going on. People are still being contacted if they have not voted.
And as you know, Jeff, one of the key advantages the Harris campaign thinks that they have is a turnout operation that is within their campaign. They have full control over it, and they believe it's been working at full capacity in the last couple of weeks. Back to you, Jake.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks, Jeff. Let's go to Caitlin Collins now, who's at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. Caitlin, what are you learning about Mr. Trump's mindset this evening?
Well, Jake, there's obviously a difference in Trump and his campaign itself. Trump himself has been making baseless claims about fraud happening already, even though officials that we're talking to in those cities like Philadelphia say they have no idea what he is talking about or what reports he's referencing. I'm here at the convention center with Kristen Holmes as well. And obviously, there's what Trump is saying on Truth Social. What are you hearing from the campaign about the numbers that they're tracking behind the scenes and what they're paying the closest attention to?
Well, Caitlin, right now, everything is coming down to voter turnout on Election Day. I mean, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of wondering about how that early voting actually translate on Election Day. Are those new voters? Are those new Republican voters? Or are those people who were going to actually show up on Election Day? There's a lot of trying to track that. Now, we know with Donald Trump is he's actually doing the exact same thing that we hear the Harris campaign is doing, is trying to reach those voters to drive out turnout today. He has done at least 5 tele-rallies with various demographic groups. That includes tele-rallies in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, as well as tele-rallies targeting young men, unregistered voters, and seniors. They are trying to get as many people to show up at the polls as they possibly can. Now, in terms of what they're tracking, they are actually looking at one of their apps that they had set up for Trump Force 47, which is their way of essentially giving away their ground game to people on the ground, to volunteers. They are looking to see how many of those volunteers are tracking their people that they were supposed to reach out and bring to the polls actually voting, because if they're not tracking the number, they want to reach out again and make sure that they're actually doing everything they can to get those people to the polls. This was part of their ground game strategy. It's also why it's so risky, because you're depending on volunteers instead of actual professionals. We'll obviously have to see if it pays off.
Yeah, it's a big bet that they are making on this election day vote. They felt good about the early vote. We'll see how they feel about the numbers that we're seeing coming in now. And obviously, Jake, North Carolina and Georgia, those polls set to close. Those are two of the states that the Trump campaign is watching the closest as maybe a read on how the whole night can go for them.
All right, thanks, Kaylin and Kristen. We're getting another important read on the electorate from the exit polls. David Chalian's back. David, what are we learning about when voters made up their minds about who they were going to vote for, whom, I should say, for president?
Jake, we've talked so much about how each candidate was closing at the end and the very small slice of voters left undecided. Most voters decided long ago. Look at this. When did you make up your mind and decide on your presidential vote? Only 3% of voters nationwide in these preliminary exit poll results say in the last few days. 3% say in the last week. 6% say in October, 7% in September. 80% of voters say before September they were already locked into their choice. And it looks pretty similar if you look among Harris supporters versus Trump supporters. Among Harris supporters, only 3% in the last few days and 3% in the last week. Again, 80% before September were locked in. And on the Trump side, we look at his supporters in the last few days, 3%, in the last week, 4%. 81% of his supporters were locked in before September. So it was a small slice of folks here that were deciding at the very end, Jake.
All right, David Chalian, fascinating stuff. Dana Bash, I mean, most people made up their minds long ago, but still, in an election with margins this thin, 3% making up their mind in the last few days, 3% making up their mind in the last week, that's not insignificant.
It is not insignificant, and this matches exactly what we've been told from both campaigns about how, yes, relative to the whole electorate, it's very small, but how targeted they have tried to be towards those what we call late breakers. And this is just proof that they were right about how narrow it is, again, broadly, but how and why it was so important for each of those campaigns to be targeting the people that they thought were most likely to come their way. And we saw it in the messaging, particularly if you think about Harris, even in the last 24 hours, reaching out to people if they weren't sure, promising that if they're a Republican or an independent, that they are not going to have to worry about her governing anything other than across the aisle. Whether they bought it, that's a different question.
Chris and I were chuckling earlier at a voter from Grand Rapids, Michigan. His name was Josh, who said that he was coming out to vote for Donald Trump. But what was interesting is he was voting on the economy, and he said he had not voted since Obama. That is the Trump fantasy, the low propensity male voter who comes out and votes on the economy.
You know, I can take your point. 3% in the last few days, 3%, even I can do that math, 6% in the last week is not nothing and could be the difference between victory and defeat. On the other hand, when you think of how unknown Kamala Harris was to the general electorate, the idea that 80% of the people had decided they were going to vote for her without knowing almost anything about her, only 7% in September, which was the big debate that was generally seen as a big victory for her and not Trump. Yes, you know, if the billions make the difference between victory and defeat, it was worth it. But man, 87% before we even got to October 1st. That's pretty amazing.
Because that's America right now. It's shirts and skins. The 80%, I mean, not to say that they didn't love her, but they're likely like either hardcore Democrats or hardcore never, ever am I going to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, but to go to Chris's point, she had to slingshot her way into the public consciousness and very quickly against somebody who had been running essentially for a decade. So I think it's actually pretty remarkable what we're seeing.
All right, we're counting down to our first chance to make projections in the presidential race. That's at the top of the next hour. We're inside key polling places in these final hours, and minutes before they close, this election night will be heading into overdrive very soon. Brew a cup of coffee for yourself. Stay with us.